Take your pin board, put it in your vise. Now we take and align the jig, this time with the pin side, the triangle showing, covering up that. We orient it left or right until we align it, and then we take and clamp it in place. One of the little tips I want to make sure you know of, that when you put this in place, you always make sure that this is down tight so that it touches all the way around in the front. That gives you a nice even cut when you make them. Now we will adjust the depth of cut exactly the same way as before. Take and put a business card. This time, since we're cutting the pin board, we take the dovetail board, we put it on the top. Again, with the router unplugged, what we do now is we adjust the depth of cut of the straight bit until it just touches that surface as in the past. It's just kissing the board, so that's exactly what we need. We take them off, plug in the router, and make the cuts. Once again, patience is of real value. You insert your router bit with the depth of cut, adjust it, turn it on, and slowly cut the joint. Always go from right to left. It gives you the best combination of cut. And take your time. After the cut is made, turn it off. Let the unit come to a complete stop. Pick it up and insert it into the second one. After you've taken, cut all your tails, cut all your pins, then you insert them in place. Now, this is a perfect fitting joint. But you don't want a joint that's too tight where you actually have to pound it together with a hammer. Because if you do, then when you apply the glue, the wood will swell slightly and you stand a chance of actually cracking the wood. So if you can push it together, that's the best. Now, as you can see, this one fits pretty good. These surfaces, these end grains, are just one business card proud of your surface, so all you do is sand those pieces off flush and you've got a perfect fitting joint. The best thing to sand that with, if you've got it, is a stationary belt sander. If not, you can use an orbital sander. That works just as well. Okay, I just want to show you just a few of the variations of the things that you can make with the jigs that you produce with your DoveTail TemplateMaster. You saw how easy they were to produce with no measurements, no fractions and all that. Just let me go through some of the examples. What we have here is a 3/4 inch and 3/4 inch board with 1 inch spacing. We have 3/4 inch boards with a 2 inch spacing. The next combination you see is the same thing, ones and ones, but the difference is, you see here we have 3/4 inch wood and 1/2 inch wood. Any combination that you want to put together, you can do. With a little bit more incentive, you can take and make variable spacings. With an example here of what you're seeing is a 1 inch spacing with a 2 inch dovetail with a 1 inch dovetail. So that you can make any kind of variations that you want, and you're not limited to these. You can actually make any combination of joints that you really want to do at any length that you want. I've just made them a little small here so I can demonstrate them in a room. The next one I wanted to show you can also make, we didn't go into any detail with it, but it's in the instruction manual received with your tool. What we have here is a box joint. As you can see right here, we have a square joint. Well, a square joint, it's just a finger joint, a box joint if you want to, whatever term you like to use. And there's a variation of that. If you take and actually round the wood over before you make the cut, and then you make the same finger joints that you did before, you drill a hole in it, and then you have a hinge joint. So it's another variation, and you're not limited to any thickness, but the 3/4 inch works rather well because you still have to drill the hole. You're not limited to just the through dovetails that I've demonstrated before. You can also make half-blind dovetails, which is normally what people see in drawer fronts. A half-blind dovetail is where you see the tail on one side, but you do not see the end grain on the other side. That's why it's called a half-blind dovetail. These are two half-blind dovetails. The example over here is a regular through dovetail. Now let me show you the easiest way that I've ever found of making the half-blind dovetails is you make a through dovetail joint just like you see right now, and then you merely glue a board on the front. Now I don't recommend that you use contrasting wood, but I'm just doing this to demonstrate of how you take and put a second piece of wood on the front side and it makes it a half-blind. Now if you look real closely at this sample right here, this is actually 3 pieces of wood, 1, 2, and 3. But since it is exactly the same piece of wood in coloration, you can't tell the difference. And it is so simple to make, I don't understand why anybody would waste their time the old-fashioned way. An additional variation you make are angled dovetail joints, as you see right here. They're very simple to make. They are absolutely no more complicated than any other way. You make a dovetail board just like you do today, like I've demonstrated before. The only thing different is you have a piece of wood that's cut on an angle. You orient it on here, you scribe your lines, you line up your jigs exactly the same way, and you cut it just on an angle this way instead of perpendicular. So when the pieces go together, they go together like that, and then you end up with this wonderful angled joint. The only thing unusual you have is this piece of wood goes over, so you just need to take that off to even it up with this. And it's no more complicated than that. It's absolutely the same. It's just as easy to make as any other through dovetail joint. And this is great for baskets and those types of things. From my years of shop experience, I would now like to share with you some very useful tips. Over time, as you cut boards and use different router bits, you will end up eating into your backer board and it eventually needs to be replaced. The easiest way to handle that, instead of making this type of assembly, you just take and put a face plate on the front of it, on the front of your backer board. So as it's sacrificed with the cuts, as you make each one of your cuts, you go into here, you can see that you're sacrificing this board, and eventually as it gets chewed up, you just have to replace this little rectangle instead of the whole assembly. Sometimes you just want to do a board that's wider than what the bolts and the clamping board will allow you to do. So very simply, just clamp the wood on with 2 clamps and then use it exactly the same way. It's very important when you make your jigs that everything is square. Now, one of the problems that you have sometimes is when you put it together that your backer board is not square to your template. And one of the easiest ways to handle that is actually just to take and put some paper in between the 2 pieces down here before you screw them together, and then just move it around until you get it exactly square, and you've got it every single time. If you're using the backer board, the replacement backer board method, it's just as easy to also put a piece of paper in here to also be able to square the piece up. It's very important that it's square, so that's what you need to do. One of the problems that you may have are uneven dovetail joints when you put them together. It now goes back to basic woodworking practices. Before you can make good joints, you got to make sure that your wood is square. If you start with square pieces of wood, the joint will go together properly. I want to show you a very simple way of filling in tiny cracks like this. If you see that we have a nice little crack right here and then here, I'm going to demonstrate the easiest way to do that is you make a mixture of sanding dust and glue. You force it into the crack, wipe it off, sand it off, and you'll be able to watch that crack just totally disappear. The first thing you do is you collect a little dust of the same wood that you're going to use, and then you mix the glue and the sawdust together until you get a fairly thick paste. You don't need a whole lot of it until it gets to be about the consistency of toothpaste. You can see that right there. Now all you do is you force it into the cracks, just like you see there. Actually, I like to just use my finger and rub it in just like that. And that's all there is to it. While it's still wet, you just take your sander and you sand it out.